The battlefield was silent, not because the war was over, but because there was no one left alive to scream. Bern, Crown Prince of Secretia, lay among the corpses of his soldiers. His armor was shattered. His lungs burned with every breath he could barely take. Victory, defeat, none of it mattered anymore. As his vision faded, Bern realized something far more terrifying than death. Secretia had fallen, and he had failed to protect it. The sound of life slowly disappeared from his ears. Light dissolved into darkness. That should have been the end. But fate had other plans. Bern opened his eyes, not to the afterlife, but to a luxurious ceiling he did not recognize. Soft silk sheets, a body that felt unfamiliar, hands that were smaller, weaker. When he looked into the mirror, the man staring back was not the Crown Prince of Secretia. He was Calian, the Third Prince of Kyris, the enemy kingdom, the nation that destroyed everything Bern loved. And this was not the present. It was 10 years before the war. Bern had been reborn as the enemy prince. Calian's body was fragile, his posture timid, his eyes carried no authority. Servants spoke to him with polite indifference. Knights did not bother to salute. This prince held no power. But inside that weak body lived a man who had commanded armies, who had watched tens of thousands die under his banner. Bern immediately understood one thing. If he revealed his intelligence too early, he would be eliminated. In Kyris, being weak was dangerous, but being too capable was fatal. So he chose silence. The imperial palace of Kyris was not ruled by brute force. It was ruled by calculation. Every smile concealed intent. Every word carried weight. The emperor of Kyris was not a mad tyrant. He was calm, sharp, dangerous. The other princes were no less threatening. Each of them wanted the throne. And Calian was nothing more than a disposable piece. Bern realized the truth. This was not a battlefield of swords, but of minds. Calian deliberately acted clumsy. He stumbled during lessons. He avoided attention. He spoke only when spoken to. Rumors spread quickly. The third prince is harmless. A waste of royal blood. Not worth watching. And that was exactly what Bern wanted. Invisibility was his shield. Because in the shadows, he could think. At night, memories returned. The screams of Secretia's people. The burning cities. The moment his banner fell. Bern clenched his fists in silence. Hatred threatened to consume him. But rage alone had already failed him once. This time, he would not repeat the same mistake. Revenge without control leads only to ruin. As Calian, Bern saw Kyris from within. The soldiers were disciplined. The logistics flawless. The command structure terrifyingly efficient. This was not a barbaric empire. This was a nation built to win wars. And for the first time, Bern questioned himself. Had Secretia truly lost only because Kyris was cruel? Or because Secretia was blind? That doubt changed everything. Calian made his first subtle action. A suggestion. A minor correction. A comment that seemed accidental. The result? A noble made a mistake. A plan failed quietly. No one traced it back to him. Bern smiled for the first time since his rebirth. The board is set. Now, I will move one piece at a time. The palace continued to overlook him. And that was dangerous. Because while others fought for influence, Calian learned everything. Military structure. Political alliances. Weaknesses hidden beneath power. He was no longer Bern the Crown Prince. He was becoming something else. Something far more dangerous. Late at night, Calian asked himself a question. If he saved Secretia, Kyris would fall. If he protected Kyris, he would betray his past. So who was he now? Bern of Secretia? Or Calian of Kyris? The answer did not come easily. One truth became clear. To survive, to change fate, to prevent meaningless deaths. He could not be a hero. He had to become a ruler. Cold when necessary, patient at all times, and willing to abandon pride. This time, I will not fight as an enemy. I will rewrite the war itself. And thus began the true story of how to live as the enemy prince. Calian remained quiet, too quiet. In the imperial palace, silence was not harmless. It was suspicious. While the other princes competed openly, the third prince watched from the edges of every room. And slowly, people began to notice that nothing around him went wrong. No scandals, no mistakes, no emotional outbursts. A prince who never failed was far more unsettling than one who did. The Emperor of Kyris finally looked at Calian. Not with affection, not with interest, but with evaluation. A single question, a simple response. Yet in that brief exchange, Calian felt it clearly. The Emperor is measuring me. One wrong answer would mean death. So Calian gave him nothing. And that restraint made the Emperor remember his name. The princes of Kyris were not brothers. They were rivals forced to share blood. Each smile concealed hostility. Each conversation was a test. Calian's weakness was mocked openly. But behind closed doors, some began to ask questions. Why does the third prince never panic? Quote, why does he never overreach? Quote, Bern understood the danger. The moment he became interesting, he became targeted. Calian studied Kyris more deeply. This empire did not rely on loyalty. It relied on structure. No noble was indispensable. No general was untouchable. Everything was replaceable. Bern finally understood why Secretia had lost. Kyris does not gamble on heroes. It manufactures victory. And that realization changed how he planned his future. Calian intentionally lost small debates. He accepted minor humiliation. To the court, he remained insignificant. But in exchange, he gained something priceless. Time. Time to learn. Time to observe. Time to build a strategy no one could see. The greatest weapon in Kyris was not a sword. It was patience. Bern's memories refused to fade. He remembered faces of soldiers who trusted him. Civilians who believed in his crown. Their deaths were not glorious. They were pointless. Calian swore silently. This time, I will not lead people to die for pride. Power without wisdom had already failed him once. A minor incident occurred in the court. A miscommunication. A delayed order. Calian had spoken only a single sentence. Yet the outcome favored one faction and weakened another. No one accused him, but some nobles began to watch him carefully. Influence, once gained, never remains invisible. Calian was asked where his loyalty lay. With Kyris? With the Emperor? He answered calmly, I belong to the Empire. It was not a lie. But it was not the truth either. Loyalty, to Calian, was something earned, not inherited. The role of the timid prince grew exhausting. Every word had to be measured. Every expression controlled. Yet Calian could not stop now. One mistake would erase everything he had built. This was the price of intelligence in a court of predators. Calian stood alone, overlooking the capital of Kyris. A city that would one day burn. Or be saved. The future was not fixed. And for the first time, the man who once died in despair felt something close to hope. The war has not begun yet. And this time, I will decide how it ends. Calian was summoned, not as a prince, but as a resource. The imperial court had noticed his silence. And now, the military wished to test it. He was assigned to observe a minor military operation. Nothing glorious, nothing important, but Calian understood the truth. This is not an honor. It is an examination. For the first time since his rebirth, Calian stood among Kyris soldiers. Their discipline was absolute, their formation flawless. This was the army that had crushed Secretia. Bern felt no pride, only clarity. War was not decided by bravery, but by preparation, and Secretia had been unprepared. The commanders discussed their plans. Calian listened. They were competent, but predictable. Quietly, he made a suggestion, a small adjustment. The result was devastatingly effective. The enemy collapsed faster than expected. The officers were surprised, some were impressed, and some became afraid. Recognition spread quickly, too quickly. Calian felt it immediately. Praise in the imperial court is a double-edged blade. To be acknowledged meant to be watched. To be watched meant to be tested. And tests in Kyris were rarely fair. The victory came at a cost. Casualties. Soldiers who would never return. Calian stared at the battlefield long after the fighting ended. This was what he had once glorified. Now, he understood its true price. A perfect strategy still kills real people. Word of the operation reached the Emperor. He did not praise Calian. He reassigned him a different unit, a more sensitive position. This was no longer coincidence. The Emperor was drawing Calian closer. And distance was safety. Unlike nobles, soldiers were honest. They respected competence. They trusted results. Calian did not command them. He listened, and slowly, their attitude toward him changed. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility again. One night, a soldier asked him, "Your Highness, have you seen war before?" Quote, Calian did not answer, because the truth was written in his eyes. Some experiences cannot be erased. The battlefield awakened something in him. Instinct, memory, authority. For brief moments, the timid prince disappeared, and in his place stood a man who had once led armies. Calian noticed the change. So did others. Calian understood the danger now. He could no longer remain invisible. The war was pulling him in. And if he resisted too much, he would be crushed. If he embraced it, he might lose himself. From this point on, there is no turning back. Calian returned to the capital. But the court felt different now. Eyes followed him. Whispers lingered behind every pillar. The third prince was no longer invisible. And in Kyris, being seen meant being weighed. Power in Kyris did not sleep. Noble factions began to calculate. Some wanted Calian as an ally. Others wanted him removed. Because a prince without a faction was unpredictable. And unpredictability frightened everyone. Calian was invited to a private gathering. The smiles were polite. The questions were sharp. Every word aimed to expose his intent. Calian answered carefully, revealing just enough to survive. Truth is dangerous. Half-truth is a weapon. Back among the troops, Calian noticed a change. They no longer looked at him as royalty. They looked at him as someone who understood war. Trust formed quietly. And trust, once given, was more powerful than authority. Another operation was planned. This time, Calian was asked directly for input. He removed glory from the equation. No reckless charges. No symbolic victories. Only efficiency. The result was success. Without applause. Survivors returned. Fewer dead. More wounded. Calian visited them personally. He listened. And the soldiers remembered that. Because generals rarely did. The emperor said nothing. But Calian's assignments changed. Greater responsibility. Closer proximity. This was not trust. It was investment. And investments demanded returns. Rumors spread. The third prince was too competent. Too calm. Too dangerous. Calian understood. At some point, usefulness turns into fear. And fear always seeks elimination. At night, Bern's memories resurfaced. He remembered the crown prince he once was. Bold, certain, proud. Calian was none of those. And yet, he was becoming something better. Something that could change the future. Calian stood at the crossroads. He could retreat, become harmless again, or advance, and accept the dangers ahead. He chose to walk forward. If war is inevitable, then I will decide who pays its price. The court did not attack Calian openly. That would have been crude. Instead, pressure appeared everywhere. Meetings he was not invited to. Decisions made without his input. Whispers that reached his ears too late. This was how Kyris tested its pieces. Not by breaking them, but by suffocating them. A senior noble approached Calian with advice. Soft words. Concerned eyes. Your Highness should be careful. Too much talent invites danger. Calian thanked him politely, and understood the message clearly. Step back, or be crushed. Calian considered disappearing again, reducing his presence, dulling his edge, but he realized something unsettling. It was already too late. The court had memorized his pattern. Retreat now would only confirm fear. A minor military failure occurred. Responsibility shifted quietly, not by evidence, but by implication. Calian's name surfaced. No accusation, no trial, just doubt, and doubt was enough. Calian did not protest. He did not argue. He presented facts. Casually, calmly. Each sentence dismantled the lie. By the time silence returned, the blame had nowhere left to stand. Some admired his composure. Others decided he was too dangerous to ignore. Word spread among the troops. The third prince had been tested, and had not fallen. Respect deepened, not because he was clever, but because he was fair. For soldiers, fairness mattered more than blood. The emperor summoned Calian again. This time, the silence lasted longer. When the emperor finally spoke, his voice carried neither approval nor threat. You adapt quickly. It was not praise. It was acknowledgement. And that was far more dangerous. Calian was assigned a formal role. Limited authority. Carefully measured power. Just enough to bind him to the system. Just enough to test his ambition. Bern recognized the trap. Power given can always be taken. With position came enemies. Subtle resistance. Delayed orders. Quiet sabotage. Calian did not confront them. He documented everything. Patience was still his strongest weapon. Standing alone, Calian reflected. He had not planned to gain power so soon. But the board had changed. And so had he. I am no longer being moved. I am being watched. Because I can move on my own. The third Prince of Kyris had become a piece that could not be ignored. Calian's new authority did not bring obedience. Orders arrived late. Reports were incomplete. Supplies vanished without explanation. No one challenged him directly. This was sabotage designed to leave no fingerprints. And in Kyris, such attacks were considered refined. Calian followed the delays, not with anger, but with curiosity. Every missing resource benefited someone. Every failure shifted power subtly. By the time the pattern emerged, Calian knew exactly who wished him gone. He said nothing. Calian did not punish individuals. Instead, he changed procedures. Double verification. Clear chains of command. Shared accountability. Sabotage became harder. And those who relied on disorder felt the pressure first. The troops noticed the difference. Orders made sense. Supply lines stabilized. Losses decreased. Morale improved. Not through speeches, but through results. Calian did not inspire loyalty. He earned trust. Calian began documenting strategy. No heroic charges. No symbolic victories. Only survival. Only efficiency. War, in his eyes, was not a stage. It was a responsibility. The nobles felt it. Their influence over the military was shrinking. A prince who relied on systems, not favors, could not be controlled. Concern turned into fear, and fear demanded action. Calian was offered command of a difficult operation, limited resources, high risk, a perfect chance to fail. Bern recognized the intention immediately. If I succeed, they will fear me more. If I fail, I will be erased. There was no safe outcome. Calian accepted. He reduced expectations, adjusted objectives. When victory was impossible, he chose survival. The operation succeeded, not gloriously, but cleanly. The reports reached the capital. Casualties were lower than predicted. Resources preserved. Territory secured. There was no celebration, only silence. Because success without spectacle left no room for criticism. Calian returned, not as a prince, but as a commander. The court sensed it. This was no longer a man learning to survive. This was someone reshaping how Kyris waged war. From this moment on, the Empire will not fight the same way again. Chapter 61 The Consequences of Change. Calian's reforms spread quietly. Orders became clearer. Operations more precise. Deaths fewer. But something else changed as well. War felt colder. Efficient killing left no room for heroism. And that absence disturbed many. Chapter 62 When soldiers stopped cheering. Victories no longer brought celebration. There were no songs. No stories of glory. Only reports. Numbers. Survivors. Calian noticed the shift. Is this truly better? Or simply cleaner? Chapter 63 The Emperor's Question. The Emperor summoned him once more. What do you believe victory means? Quote. Calian answered without hesitation. Fewer deaths. The Emperor did not reply. But for the first time, his expression softened. Chapter 64 Memories that refused to stay silent. At night, Bern dreamed again. The faces of soldiers he once praised for dying bravely. Now he understood the cruelty of those words. Glory had been a lie. And he had believed it. Chapter 65 A nation watching quietly. Beyond the palace, news spread through the empire. The third prince fought wars differently. Some admired it. Some feared it. Because a ruler who valued lives was unpredictable. Chapter 66 The Limit of Control. Calian realized his influence had grown too fast. People followed his methods, even without orders. This was dangerous. A movement could be crushed. An idea could not. And ideas threatened emperors. Chapter 67 A decision without apology. Calian chose not to slow down. Not to reassure the nobles. Not to hide his philosophy. If I stop now, everything I've done becomes meaningless. He accepted the risk. Chapter 68 The Ghost of Secretia. Reports arrived from the borders. Tensions rising. Old enemies watching. Secretia's name surfaced again. Bern's chest tightened. History was circling back. Chapter 69 Two countries. One future. Calian stood before a map. Kyris. Secretia. Once, he had seen them as enemies. Now, he saw only people, trapped between decisions made by rulers. The war to come would not be simple. Calian reached his conclusion. He would not fight for conquest. He would not fight for revenge. He would fight to end the cycle. If war is inevitable, then it must be the last one. The enemy prince had chosen his path. The borders grew restless. Troops moved without orders. Messengers rode day and night. Everyone felt it. War was approaching, not with rage, but with inevitability. Calian watched in silence. A commander challenged Calian. Your methods work in theory, but war is chaos. Calian did not argue. He knew this truth well. His ideals had never denied reality. They sought to survive within it. A difficult decision arose. Spare an enemy unit, or destroy it. Calian chose restraint. The cost came quickly. Lives were lost, and the blame was placed squarely on him. The court whispered again. Compassion is weakness. Efficiency must come first. Calian accepted the criticism, because this failure was real, and ignoring it would only repeat history. Next time, Calian chose differently. The operation succeeded. Fewer Kyris soldiers died, but more enemies did. Victory tasted bitter, and the price of leadership became clear. Some soldiers respected the outcome. Others feared Calian, because a commander who could choose cruelty, when necessary, was far more terrifying than one who always did. The emperor observed everything. Calian's victories, his failures. He said nothing, but doubt lingered. A prince with ideals could become a ruler, or a liability. Calian no longer believed there was a perfect solution. Every choice created victims. The only question was how many, and whether those deaths meant something. On a quiet night, Calian remembered dying, not as a hero, but as a man who failed to stop the war. He would not accept that ending again. Orders were issued. Mobilization began. This was no longer preparation. This was commitment. From this moment on, the future cannot be undone. Calian stood at the center of history. And history was moving. There was no declaration, no dramatic speech. War began the way it always truly does, with orders written in silence. Troops moved. Supplies vanished from warehouses. Borders ceased to exist. Calian watched it unfold. This was not destiny. This was choice. The emperor summoned Calian one last time. No threats. No warnings. Only a single question. Can you carry the weight of this war? Quote, Calian answered quietly. I already do. For the first time. The emperor did not challenge him. Calian reshaped the campaign. Not to conquer. Not to annihilate. But to limit escalation. Every move anticipated retaliation. Every victory denied revenge. The war did not burn wildly. It tightened. Like a closing fist. Reports arrived from the opposing side. Commanders with pride. Soldiers eager for glory. Calian recognized them. They were reflections of Bern. Men who believed sacrifice proved righteousness. And that terrified him. A decisive clash unfolded. No speeches. No banners charging into legend. Only positioning. Timing. Withdrawal. The battle ended quickly. Too quickly for songs to be written. Thousands lived, and no one felt victorious. The wounded filled the camps. Calian walked among them, not as a prince, not as a commander, but as a witness. Because leadership did not end. When the fighting stopped, that night, Calian dreamed, not of his death, but of the crown prince he once was. Standing on a battlefield, still believing in glory. Bern looked at him, and faded. Calian woke up alone. Bern was gone. Negotiations began, not through threats, but exhaustion. Calian did not demand submission. He demanded stability, and stability, after enough death, became desirable. Borders settled. Armies stood down. The war ended not with triumph, but with restraint. History struggled to record it. Because it lacked spectacle, Calian was offered more titles, recognition, a clearer path to the throne. He declined. Power gained through war should never feel rewarding. The empire healed slowly, not because it was forced to, but because it was allowed to. Calian faded from the spotlight again, this time by choice. There were no monuments, no epics written in his name. Only records. Numbers that showed fewer dead than any war before. And for Calian, that was enough. Calian stood once more beneath the open sky. Not as Bern, not as an enemy, but as someone who had lived. between two worlds, and refused to let either destroy the other. To live as the enemy prince is not to seek victory. It is to ensure the war ends. And so the story closed. Not with glory, but with meaning.